Coming up on Network Africa. 2 people killed, 27 others injured as Chad junta leader promises inclusive national dialogue amid protests for return to civilian rule. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken begins his virtual African tour of Kenya and Nigeria. Plus, the United Nations warns that South Sudan risks returning to a large-scale conflict. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia. We begin in Chad, where the country's new leader, Mahamat Kaka Debi Itno, has addressed the nation, promising an inclusive national dialogue aimed at returning the country to civilian rule within 18 months, following the death of his father and longtime president, Idris Deby. The new leader also pledged to fight terrorism. His speech came amid protests against the military takeover in the capital, N'Djamena, and the southern city of Maundu, where at least 2 people died and dozens were injured. Key ally France has expressed concern with President Emmanuel Macron, saying he condemns the suppression of Tuesday's protests in the strongest terms and opposes a father-to-son succession plan. Earlier on Tuesday, 2 people were killed amid protests against the country's ruling military council. On Monday, Chad's new military rulers named a civilian politician, Albert Bahimi Padak, as the prime minister of a transitional government, but opposition leaders also quickly dismissed the appointment. Tensions have been high since the military swiftly transferred power to General Mahamat Idris Deby following his father's death. He is expected to serve up until elections are held in 18 months, but this has not gone down well with opposition protesters. The internet has also been cut off to limit the flow of information. The rising tensions amplify fears that Chad could descend irretrievably into chaos. To discuss this further is an African affairs analyst, Achike Trude, who joins us now from Bagada here in Lagos. Thanks for joining us on the program. Tell us, what do you make of this protest barely a week after President Deby's funeral?
Well, the situation in Chad was always fluid following the death of Idris Deby in the war front. He had held on to Chadian political life for about 30 decades, and that's a very long time for anybody. And so it was always going to be a tall order to ensure some level of stability, at least the kind of stability that Chad had under Deby. And so, of course, we know that what the military did at the best of times, would be described as a power grab. And the military has no business in political power. We all know that. And but I think at the moment that Idris Deby was killed, a lot of people, were involved in the marriage of convenience, more or less just a lot of countries with the Chadian military forces because of the growing crisis of insurgency. So it was only a matter of time if the narrative changed. And so we are not too surprised seeing what we are seeing today. People have, I think, woken up to the reality that the military has no business being in charge of political life in Chad. And they are asking, for political inclusion, they are asking for dialogue. And that is the only way that they can have any form of accommodation with the military, just as we have seen in some West African countries. So I think that is what is happening. And as if this crisis escalates, these demonstrations and protests, then you can be sure that the power dynamics in Chad will change very swiftly.
Well, speaking of the power dynamics, the Transitional Military Council is being pressured by opposition parties to hand over power to civilian leadership as soon as possible. The TMC has promised to do so in 18 months' time, but as you know, there is already a precedent in Africa with military leadership. Transition of power is already difficult, so do you think that this will be any different?
Well, it depends. It depends. Like I said, the situation is quite fluid and it can change at any particular point in time. The the military, the transitional government has promised 18 months. And at the time that was done, there was really no opposition at that particular point in time in opposition to the 18 months mandate given by the transitional government. And it would appear that most countries, especially countries in the Sahel region and the countries in West Africa, United Nations, the African Union, and France that has played a critical role in that country, that it appeared that most of them were agreed on it because there was really no disagreement. There was no engagement with the military over the 18-month timeline given. And so I think in a way it has come to stay unless the situation in Chad politically changes. If the opposition is able to build a groundswell of mobilization against the transitional government, then perhaps they could get into negotiations with them for the purpose of having perhaps a different timeline or a timeline that would involve more civilian participation in the democratic process.
All right. Well, Mr. Chude, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
Security officials in Burkina Faso say 4 people have been kidnapped near the Pama Nature Reserve on the eastern border with Benin and Niger. The 4, a soldier in Burkina Faso's army, 2 Spanish nationals, and a conservation worker from Ireland were ambushed on a road near the reserve. Burkina Faso is facing a deepening security crisis like many of its neighbors, as Islamist armed groups carry out raids and kidnappings across much of the region. Officials at Ireland's foreign ministry said they were liaising with local authorities over the missing citizen. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Ethiopia to address what he described as an impending humanitarian disaster in the northern region of Tigray. In a phone call with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he said troops from neighboring Eritrea should be withdrawn immediately in full and verifiable manner. He expressed concerns about ethnic tensions elsewhere in the country, and in the meantime, the Ethiopian government hasn't said anything about the call just yet. The State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, said that during the conversation with Mr. Abiy, the Secretary of State had stressed his support for Ethiopia, but also expressed concerns about human rights abuses in Tigray.
We are gravely concerned about the deteriorating humanitarian crisis in Tigray and the reports of human rights abuses, violations, and atrocities that have emanated from there. This administration has encouraged international partners, including the AU and regional partners, to work with us to address the crisis in Tigray, including through action at the UN and other relevant bodies. Now, of course, we have heard statements emanate from the region. We have heard the Eritrean government's public statement that it will withdraw its forces from Tigray, but that must still be implemented in practice. There is no evidence that such a withdrawal is underway, and any such withdrawal must be immediate and verifiable. We also call and continue to call for a withdrawal of Amhara regional forces from Tigray for an immediate end to the hostilities, all of which are critical to protecting civilians and ensuring unhindered humanitarian access.
Well, the U.S. Secretary of State has begun his virtual tour of Africa, where he is visiting Kenya and Nigeria to encourage and engage young people from across the continent. Mr. Blinken will begin his virtual travel to Africa, meeting with Young African Leadership Initiative, or YALI, alumni. In Nigeria, he will be meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari and Foreign Minister Geoffrey Onyema to discuss continuing joint efforts to counter terrorism and insecurity, strengthen health systems, support democratic institutions, bolster economic growth, advance gender equality, and to boost bilateral trade between the United States and Nigeria. World Health Program WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says the COVID-19 pandemic continues to intensify at a global level, noting that there were almost as many cases globally last week in the first 5 months of the pandemic. He also adds that even as COVID-19 vaccines give hope, the pandemic has caused severe disruptions to immunization services around the world. This week is World Immunization Week in 2021 from the 24th to the 30th of April, highlighting the need to build public trust in the value of all vaccines and to help build long-term support for immunization.
Globally, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to intensify. Cases have now increased for the 9th straight week, and deaths have increased for the 6th straight week. To put it in perspective, there were almost as many cases globally last week as in the first 5 months of the pandemic. The latest WHO Pulse survey shows that routine immunization services were disrupted in more than a third of countries in the first quarter of 2021. While this represents a significant improvement over last year, it remains a serious concern. Gaps in vaccination coverage are already having grave real-world consequences. Serious measles outbreaks have occurred in several countries, including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Pakistan, and Yemen. And the risk of measles outbreaks is mounting elsewhere, as more and more children miss out on the vaccines they so urgently need.
Dr. Akiala Ishaku, Senior Lecturer of Microbiology at the Nasarawa State University, joins us now for more on this. Thanks for joining us on the program. This week is World Immunization Week. With the introduction of vaccines during the pandemic, people are still skeptical about receiving the COVID vaccines, especially with reports of side effects. So how can we boost faith in the vaccines?
Yeah, I think what we just need to do is to do and edit the talk. We need to have a multi-dimensional approach to begin to. We need stakeholders collaboration. We need a strategic communication, and we need expanded collaboration. So we need people to come together to actually drive this process. We missed it from the beginning in terms of advanced advocacy for vaccine uptake. So I think what we just need to do now is to rejig our methodology or our strategy in terms of advocacy or public health advocacy when it comes to vaccines. So we need to do a lot because COVID-19 vaccine came with a lot of fake news, misinformation, a lot of vaccine hesitancy. What we need to do is to return back the trust and the faith, not only to COVID vaccine, but to all other vaccines. We shall be seeing a kind of a drastic drop in terms of vaccine uptake, even for the childhood diseases. A lot of parents will become hesitant even in giving their children vaccines, of reaching out to this target population for vaccines uptake.
Well, we do have reports of countries, Malawi and South Sudan, planning to destroy the vaccines that they say have already expired, even though the World Health Organization has advised against it, saying it is still potent after 36 months. So what do you make of this, and do you think they were supplied almost expired vaccines?
The vaccines we are not supplied expired. The vaccines we are supplied, they are quite potent. But what I think is that they have done their vaccine efficacy and they have discovered that the vaccines have lost its potency. And thereby, if vaccines have lost its potency, the vaccine should be destroyed. We are living in a 21st century knowledge-based economy, and nations are actually moving towards research. Malawi, South Africa have done extensive research on the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, and they discovered that it has lost lost its own potency. The potency can be lost in terms of immunogenicity. The potency can be lost in terms of even the storage. Once you meet the storage temperature, the vaccines will lose its own potency. I want NAFDAC in Nigeria to also do the same. We need to actually carry out phase-by-phase time series point analysis of COVID-19 vaccine to check for its efficacy. Because in the whole entire world in medical sciences, no vaccine has been produced from mRNA. This is the first time. And the chances of vaccines, mRNA vaccines losing its potency is about 97.2%. Therefore, NAFDAC needs to also carry out a time point series.
Dr. Chakwe, we want to thank you for coming on the program and making some very valid points. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Still to come on the program, Nigerian teen climate activists create fashion from waste. More details after the break. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The UN has warned that the slow implementation of the peace accord in South Sudan is putting the country at risk of a return to large-scale conflict. A new report calls for the arms embargo to be extended and for new sanctions against people who hinder the implementation of the peace deal. Since it was signed 3 years ago, South Sudan has seen many bouts of violence between supporters of President Salva Kiir and his rival Riek Machar, who under the terms of the agreement was reappointed vice president. The report says the conflict has prevented humanitarian aid being delivered, putting the people of South Sudan in urgent need of assistance. The UN mission in South Sudan has hosted a 2-day workshop aimed at providing a platform for civil society representatives and state government officials from the newly formed government in central Equatoria. It is to come together and discuss a strategic action plan on implementing the provisions of the revitalized peace agreement. The event took place in the country's capital, Juba, and it was organized by Community Empowerment for Progress Organization, or CIPO, a nonprofit, civil society undertaking in the world's newest country. Frank discussions took place during the event with emphasis on the need to move forward and implement the provisions of the peace agreement.
The idea is that UNMISS Civil Affairs and CEPO are trying to say we need to give a strategic direction for the new established government of Central Equatorial State under the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan. As we are aware that this agreement was signed, this agreement is too ambitious. At the same time, we need to see now how can Central Equatorial State customize the agreement implementation to their level from a strategic direction. And also we are aware that the agreement does not only respond to the needs of citizens, but we have other needs. So the idea is coming together with the government officials of Central Equatorial State to discuss about strategic plan, that this strategic plan become the framework that informs the priorities and actions of Central Equatorial State government.
This is the platform to support the government to come and think about what is their vision and what is their strategic directions they're going on. And you can also, the importance that it is UNMISS is much more on the supporting role. It's mainly facilitated by a CIPO, is the organization, a civil society organization. So it is building also a partnership of the civil society and with the local government on delivering services to the people and how to build a government.
During his 3-day visit to Rwanda, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, on Sunday visited one of 2 emergency transit facilities in Africa, providing life-saving support to asylum seekers stranded in Libya. The High Commissioner praised the government of Rwanda as well as Niger, the other country welcoming refugees and asylum seekers being evacuated from Libya, for their continued solidarity and generosity, giving hope to the vulnerable asylum seekers and refugees in Africa in dire need of protection and safety. The emergency transit mechanism in Rwanda is an agreement between the government, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and the African Union to move refugees most at risk in Libya to the safety of a transit center in Gashora, a district some 60 kilometers from Kigali.
I spoke to a family from Somalia. Many of them have harrowing stories of abuse, of torture even, of long detention, of uncertainty, of despair. And this is a time when they can also try to overcome some of that trauma. I really want to particularly thank the government of Rwanda, President Kagame himself, whose initiative it was to launch the ETM initiative in Rwanda itself a few years ago.
15-year-old Esohe Ozigbo is part of a group of youth that take part in community cleanups, tree planting programs, and trash and shows in Lagos. Her interest in protecting the environment began 4 years ago, and she is confident that if they can get more people to care and more young people involved, even the 10,000 metric tons of waste their home city of Lagos generates every day can be responsibly managed.
Welcome to Lagos Trash and Show, where models strut down a catwalk wearing outfits made from waste. Their clothes are made from discarded plastic bags. The event is run by teenage eco-warriors such as 15-year-old Esohe Ozigbo.
The Trash and Show means a lot to me. I've been doing it for years, and it's like a way of showcasing to everyone what we can do with the trash we so carelessly discard. And I really think it's just like us making a statement and showing that we care about the environment, and you should too, because we're just teenagers, but we're trying to make a change in the world.
The environmental activists stage their shows in shopping malls, mixing fashion with advocacy in a bid to spread a green message. Plastic waste and litter is ubiquitous in Lagos, the commercial capital of Africa's most populous country, Nigeria. With more than 20 million people, the megacity generates 10,000 metric tons of waste every day. Ozigbo and her group participate in community cleanups, recently wading through a mass of plastic pollution that blocked a waterway. They are supported in their mission by Green Fingers Guarded.
So we felt, why not mix creativity with advocacy? And that was why we actually went out with this. So the students are the ones, together we went out, we picked up the plastic, we cleaned the environment. But rather than just taking everything maybe to a dumping site or so, we felt we get creative with it. So we decided to spruce things up and start the fashion show, the trash and show.
Ozigbo says her generation should begin working now before it's too late to do anything about the environment.
We are the generation who are going to be leading in a few years. And the older people, at the end of the day, they will end up leaving this earth and we'll be the ones left with it. So we need to start now, because in a few years, it's going to be too late to do anything.
Ozigbo also hopes the shows make shoppers think about their actions when dealing with the environment, and cites Swedish teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg as her inspiration.
Well, that's definitely one creative way to get involved and help the environment. That's all we have for the program today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great evening and stay safe.